On a warm afternoon in July, there stood on a street corner a man named Tim. He decided that he'd start a business providing refreshments in the form of his signature hamburgers. On that day, Tim's Burger Barn was founded and would go on to become widely popular. The burgers made for an excellent full meal which left people satisfied. However, some didn't have the time or energy to sit down for a full meal at lunch. Some only had a few minutes before they had to be back at their jobs. Enter the new kid on the block. He offered bite-sized burgers at a lower price. His business became popular with the workforce and those on a diet. But what's this? Tim has noticed his competition stealing business with this new bite-sized burger. So he begins selling his own Tiny Tim burgers in an effort to cash in on this trend. Suppose Tim's business brings back those lost customers and then some, in which case he's earned them back by increasing the value he offers. However, if his competition responds by increasing the speed of their service, offering better prices, or advertising healthier ingredients, they can win back some of those customers. This is the essence and spirit of capitalist competition. In this state of affairs, companies live or die based on the merits of their product. As they continue increasing their value to try to win back customers, the customer has their pick of the best the market can offer at any given moment. However, in our world of modern entertainment, this state of affairs is comparatively rare. That's because many forms of competition have been made illegal. Let's look at the Nintendo Switch on the merits of its hardware. Its main advantage is that it's a hybrid console released at a time when those were mostly unheard of. It proved demand for dockable handhelds and met that demand decently well. However, it is not a perfect solution in all cases. For instance, the Switch is too big for those who just want something to throw in their pocket and not worry about. Having to lug around a small briefcase means you can't really just have it on you and whip it out whenever. On the other end of the spectrum, the Switch is severely underpowered by today's standards, only offering a fraction of the horsepower available on the market and capping out at 720p, often at 30 frames per second. But for players who aren't bothered by any of that, it's a fine product. The Switch is a middle-of-the-road handheld, able to meet players' needs at a respectable level. That is, when it's working. The joysticks on most official Switch hardware are prone to drifting, which forces the user to either send in their hardware or buy a new one. Worse, the issue could be fixed by a minor adjustment in manufacturing, but it seems Nintendo didn't care enough to update their designs for the Switch Lite. Compare this to AYN's Odin 2. This console comes with Hall sensor sticks, which basically eliminate the drift issue altogether. It's also known for being a powerhouse, able to run just about any game you throw at it at a full 1080p. Add to that an insane battery life, and you've got a dockable handheld which destroys the Switch on its hardware merits at around the same size and at a fantastic price. Or perhaps you're looking for a smaller, pocketable device which can still play retro titles. In that case, the Mii U Mini or any number of Anbernic handhelds would do the trick. These also tend to come in a 4:3 aspect ratio, meaning games will perfectly fill out the whole screen, without black bars on the sides. Not to mention, a lot of these devices are made to look kinda like a classic DMG Game Boy, which is an added nostalgia factor. Here I've outlined two types of alternatives to the Nintendo Switch, which fill certain niches much better than it can. However, I have a hard time imagining either of these could ever present a real threat to the Switch's market share, despite the number of people who would jump at a more powerful Switch model, or what Nintendo might call a Game Boy Plus if they were selling it. Sure, maybe that's due to a lack of marketing, or the fact that the Switch was the first device of its kind, but I think there's a more obvious reason that explains why the Switch would remain the #1 choice over its competition.
Oh, Nintendo!
It's got games!
Whoa! Oh, it's got games! Nintendo, oh my gosh!
Anime garbage!
Fortnite!
Duh. Ask anyone and they'll tell you people buy Switches because that's how you play any of the Mario, Zelda, or Metroid games. They're not officially offered on any other platform, so if you're interested in those franchises, or any of the other exclusives, you have to get a Switch. It's been made illegal for any company to compete with Nintendo by openly offering alternative ways to play Nintendo games. Because this is the case, Nintendo are not incentivized to stay on top of their competition when it comes to hardware, but are instead incentivized to sue or DMCA claim as many people as they can afford to maintain their position as the only legitimate source of their intellectual property. This forces the Switch's competitors into a gray market. They can't market themselves as Nintendo-compatible devices or offer the same convenience as the Switch. They must leave it up to the customer to tinker with files and install emulators to get things set up. Maybe that doesn't look like a problem. Maybe it looks perfectly fine for this to be the way things are. This isn't a very common approach to discussing these products, and so I can acknowledge it can be hard to see how things could be better. Let me illustrate further by tweaking my previous burger example. Suppose Tim owned a patent on the concept of a hamburger. His competition are still allowed to make other types of sandwiches, sure, but only Tim is legally allowed to make burgers, everyone's favorite sandwich. Let's say he invented them. As such, wouldn't it make sense that he should be allowed to protect his invention with a patent? But of course, if he does this, the previous state of affairs is made impossible. Customers never get to experience the competitor's burgers, and consequently never get to experience the Tiny Tims. Worse yet, the more people want burgers specifically, the safer Tim is to raise his prices and lower the quality of his product, since he wants to increase efficiency and also has no reason to expect competition. In this way, the value of Tim's product is no longer tied to its quality, but its exclusivity. Thus, it can be said that intellectual property artificially inflates the value of an accompanying product or service past where it should be based solely on its merits. This is why streaming services keep getting shittier and simultaneously more expensive, as well as why movies are getting worse and worse. If these industries had to compete based on their own services or talents, they would simply be outperformed by those who put more care into their work. This is also why catastrophes like Joy-Con drift can go mostly unaddressed. Nintendo knows you have to keep supporting their hardware because, well, they have games. Hey, you got any grass-fed? I'll take pickles, lettuce, and some onion. Now, it is true that once the value of the IP drops below a certain threshold, then people will leave. Simply look at what's happening to Disney for confirmation of that. But I think it's a terrible norm to set. I'd rather not have to wait for my favorite franchises to be ruined or killed in order for positive change to occur. I'd much rather use competition for that purpose. So, how would that work? What would happen long term if all intellectual property law were abolished? What does that world look like? Well, you'd be able to rightfully say that artists don't own the art they produce, at least in the abstract sense. Let's think about what that means. To quote Stephan Kinsella in his book Against Intellectual Property, IP rights give to pattern creators, artists, partial rights of control, ownership over the tangible property of everyone else. The pattern creator has partial ownership of others' property by virtue of his IP right, because he can prohibit them from performing certain actions with their own property. Author X, for example, can prohibit a third party, Y, from inscribing a certain pattern of words on Y's own blank pages with Y's own ink. In other words, if I come up with an original artwork TM do not steal, I have simultaneously disallowed everyone else from recreating that artwork, even if by doing so they're not preventing me from continuing to do what I wish with it. You see, the purpose of property ownership is intertwined with the fact that we live in a finite world. If you and I disagree on how a scarce resource, like a bottle of water, is to be used, we default to property ownership to resolve the dispute. If we each had our own water, there wouldn't be a conflict since we could use our own water independently of one another. This is why ownership of ideas is fundamentally incoherent. There is no scarcity at all with ideas since they can be copied from person to person infinitely. And as you might guess, this goes doubly for computer data, which is literally just an arrangement of bytes on a storage disk. For a deeper dive on these matters, I recommend checking out the YouTube channel LiquidZulu, who packs his videos full of research and illustrations which makes things clear and understandable. He has a video on copyright, which is where I learned of that Kinsella quote. In this post-IP world, because artists wouldn't own their art, they also couldn't stop people from copying it and giving it away for free. However, this isn't to say they have no means to be compensated for their work. but just that they can't continually sit on their previous works to rake in profits. Artists can utilize crowdfunding, meetups, live performance, exhibitions, commissions, or patronage to be supported by fans. All of this requires them to be actively producing more work in order to earn. This also means many other forms of expression will be opened up to more monetization, such as mods, emulators, fan remakes, and unofficial sequels, among others. They may even be allowed to have large budgets behind them, since they wouldn't have to worry about DMCA claims crashing down on them. Once again, there's much more to this topic than I can get into here, so for further viewing, I'll recommend two creators. They are Uniquenameosaurus and Danny Duchamp. Bleh, oh my god. Danny Duchamp. Duchamp. Both put out videos addressing IP law, which I highly recommend. Links to all these creators will be in the description.
Under Tim's perfect planet Earth, intellectual property would not exist.
Oh, well, that's good.
But we're not on my planet, are we?
No.
Under our current copyright system, the legality of all fan creations is highly questionable. Looking at fair use precedent, one finds 5 or 6 factors that may influence a work's fair use status. Whether it's transformative, whether it borrows from fiction or non-fiction, whether it borrows the essential parts of the original, whether it could be understood as parody, whether the work has a market effect, and finally, whether the work appeals to the judge's subjective morality. Because of the nature of most fan works, they must necessarily violate the first 3 factors. Fans tend to want to express the same untransformed characters and the most meaningful parts of their respective series with as much passion and dedication as they can. And if they're paid in commissions, Patreon, or merch sales for doing so, they're now creating a significant market effect with copyrighted material they do not own. Heck, they don't even need to get paid. If your fan project is diverting enough attention away from official Nintendo products, it could be argued to have threatened Nintendo's business. If you ask me, the only thing stopping Nintendo from issuing more fan art takedowns is knowledge, time, and returns. Regardless of whether or not a fan project has been struck, it should be understood that its creators are most likely violating the law. Whenever one of these big Nintendo takedowns hits the news, I often see this apologetic attitude emerge from within the community. Nintendo is simply acting within their legal rights. When left at that, it almost comes across like it's just fine for Nintendo to destroy people's passionate work. Now don't get me wrong, it's good to acknowledge that they're in the legal right for the sake of factual accuracy, but I wouldn't for a second entertain the idea that they're in the moral right. The very fact that people feel the need to continue reminding people of Nintendo's legal rights almost just confirms the understood immorality of what they're doing. At this point, I'm comfortable labeling them a bad actor who's been enabled by an immoral law. Like, come on. If they really feel so threatened by fan passion projects, why wouldn't they simply outcompete them rather than bullying them into submission? Because they simply don't have to. Believe me, if it paid off for them, they actually would do the meme of suing little Billy for drawing Mario in class. Since we don't live on planet Timothea, it's safe to assume copyright law isn't going anywhere anytime soon. But it would just be nice to see us making a good start by properly laying blame on Nintendo for their moral transgressions. It fills me with hope to watch situations like the Helldivers 2 revolt unfold. Sure, there may have been some pseudo-nitwits jumping on their high horses, claiming Sony is just acting within their legal rights, but they were drowned in a sea of thumbs downs and harsh reviews. The gaming community absolutely wouldn't tolerate their cherished experiences to be encroached by anti-consumer bullshit. Just imagine if the same fury were levied at Nintendo for essentially flushing years of passionate fan work down the toilet. They'd be forced to actually do what companies are supposed to do, serve their customer base. If the fans want fan projects, they don't need the law on their side. They just need to assert their financial power over the company to show them that filing these predatory lawsuits will not be tolerated. Of course, even this may just be a pipe dream, but that power truly does exist within the fan base. I, for one, am almost automatically doing this simply because of my genuine disgust at the state of Nintendo these days. Maybe it's just a matter of time before others start feeling it too.